Greetings to you all. My name is Mandi Rukuni, and I'm going to talk to you today about the message. So the message is, in part, a wake-up call from me to my fellow Africans, and in part, the message is a proposal I'm making to my fellow Africans that we accelerate the pace at which we are generating intellectual resources for advancing our African society. So the message is crafted under 7 major themes, which I propose require more research, more discussion, deepening the dialogue, and seeking for solutions with respect to developments in Africa. First is the realization that world over, people are losing capacity to relate to one another in ways that are enlightened and tolerant. At the same time, technological progress is happening at exponential rate the world over. The human race is therefore depreciating its capacity to relate, while at the same time increasing capacity for conflict. We as Africans are getting caught up in this quagmire, but I think we Africans should not be part of the problem. We should be part of the solution. And in that regard, we simply have to go back to our worldview as Africans and rely on the age-old tested values of Hunu, Ubuntu, Butu, Udugu, which I will propose towards the end is the very basis in which we Africans are going to make a major contribution to humanity moving forward. Second is that we must modernize, not westernize Africa. We tend to confuse the two. As a result, our developmental strategies tend to be disconnected to African reality. And in general, these development agendas are bankrupt of African wisdom and intellect. We need to do better than that moving forward. Third, we need to address the unorthodox nature in which our economies are growing in Africa. It is unorthodox in terms of the economic structural transformation process happening almost very actually backwards if you compare this with what happened in Europe, US, and other high-income countries. The bottom line is we do have the good news that since about the year 2000, African economies have been growing steadily. The bad news, though, is that every low-income country in Africa, which is making headway to being a middle-income country, will sooner or later enter this middle-income country trap. Every African country is headed for a middle-income country trap at the moment. That is why on the African continent we don't have a high-income country. So what is this middle-income country trap? Well, the point is, growing from low-income country to middle-income country, whilst it is a good thing to have, what's happening is the fundamental structure of the economies is not changing. In fact, the dual economy nature of our economies is being reinforced as we move from low income to middle income country. The bottom line is our domestic market is too narrow. Too few people are participating in the economy. Few taxpayers, few ratepayers, and our cities are not viable. So a middle income country trap can be summarized in, first and foremost, economic growth stagnates, the equilibrium rate of unemployment goes up, and inequality worsens. Well, there are options that we Africans have to look at in terms of how do we break away from this dual economy approach? How do we broaden our economies and our domestic markets so that the majority of people are connected in the mainstream economies, so that the majority of people are able to actually participate in the mainstream markets. As is, I would say that we're urbanizing with very few manufacturing jobs being created. So urbanization without jobs means it's urbanization because of poverty. Well, a proper structural transformation sees urbanization as a result of economic growth. So we need to explore the options to get us out of this and how to grow, especially the rural middle class, so that we can actually head for high income status within this century. Fourth, we need to strengthen governments, and especially we need to craft more competent public administration systems at all levels of our society. Gone are the days when we as Africans have been told by others that we don't need a strong government in order to develop, we just need the private sector. Well, for high income countries where more than 95% of the population is in urban areas, it is actually the fact that society is easily structured in terms of government, so-called private sector, and so-called civil society. But in Africa, the emphasis really should be on the communities who are not, by the way, that well represented, either by governments or by private sector or by civil society. Private sector is simply a euphemism for big and medium-sized businesses, whereas on the continent, the largest segment of business are the indigenous commerce, so-called informal sector. So, with respect to strong government and capable public administration, there are two elements that need to improve on the continent. One is the ownership of the development agenda needs to be more national and less donor-driven. And as part of that, the public policy process as well as the development agenda needs to be better owned at community level. 5, we need to reform public expenditure budget architecture so that it reflects the priority that is to be given in investing in people. Our current budget architecture emphasizes investment in things, but development should be about investing in people, not investing in things. There's just too much emphasis on material poverty in the way development programs are designed. Whilst material poverty is important to deal with, it is not the primary cause of our social ills on the continent. As a matter of fact, material poverty is a symptom of deeper levels of poverty. Material poverty, at the end of it all, just simply means we are producing things we don't rely on, and then we rely on things we don't produce, so we get poorer. But the main cause of material poverty is intellectual poverty and spiritual poverty. And we need to deal with those in greater detail as we move forward. Finally, we need to invest in a cultural revolution that informs the African Renaissance. It is the process of elevating once more the African worldview and cultural perspectives, where we have embedded the good aspects of our society from the past. We need to harness the wholesome things from our past that made Africa a great people in the past. And more importantly, is to understand this worldview deeply and to cause a philosophical discourse and reflection at all levels of society by all people using their own language or languages. So what do I mean by an African worldview? Well, as a generalization, African philosophy and values seem to always revolve around two perspectives which contain both intuitive and counterintuitive wisdom combined. First, Africans have always wondered and marveled, appreciated the great diversity that exists in life. So existence and life continue to exhibit diversity, yet at the same time, there is some oneness and unity in this existence and this life. The second aspect is also an appreciation of how things keep moving, things keep changing, and how that defines existence and life. And yet, at the same time, there seems to be some continuity of some kind that also happens at the same time. So the African worldview takes these intuitive and counterintuitive elements into one perspective of life, which ultimately revolves around relationships and oneness. Now, this worldview is what allowed Africans in the past to develop and craft the family and community system, which up until today is one of the best social constructions I have seen anywhere in the world. This is a system that, when it was working at its best, never allowed anyone not to belong. No one would go destitute. The lowest social security system in the world, and the one that defines us as African the most. Now, over the last 500 years, this worldview may have been trampled upon. I mean, the historicity of colonialism may have basically done one major thing, and that is relegate everything African to subordination. But, as I say, the subordination was total in its violence and its psychology. And up until today, you can tell how successful colonialism was by the level of colonial trauma that we keep experiencing 500 years after slavery and colonialism. So there is need to de-traumatize Africans so that we stop fearing to be Africans. And if I speak for myself, and I'm 65 years old now, it took me a long time to eliminate the fear of being African so that I can express myself and think using an African worldview. And the more I've de-traumatized myself using ad hoc means, the more I've realized this actually has to happen properly. We actually need this trauma to be well analyzed. We need psychotherapy at all levels to allow us to slowly reform all the key institutions of society where colonial trauma planted long-term. It's almost like planting a DNA, a process of continually depreciating ourselves as African. So this covers not just the history, it's subordination of our culture, subordination of our religions, subordinations of our educational system, subordination eventually of the political and economic system so that they continue to serve others. Now, I personally have learned not to be angry at colonialism and the history. I think the Creator did not put us on this world to change history. It's more important for us to create new history. Even more important is for us just to look back where we came from so that we can move forward with greater confidence and resolve. The so-called Sankofa idea. Sankofa is an Akan word which basically says, look back, just to collect what's wholesome from your past and use that to move forward with a lot more gusto. So I believe that the Africa Union's 2063 agenda is a great idea. But now it's time to put the spirit of the African worldview in it and give it some energy to really allow Africans finally to integrate. With all the great diversity on the continent, there is that continuity, there is that unity, which if we don't harness it now, we are going to struggle as Africans to have an impact on the global scene. Not one African country on its own is going to enter the G7 club this century if we go by the present trajectory. And yet, collectively as Africans, we will be in the G1, G2 before the end of the century. So I believe finally that the African worldview is what the world is looking for today. It may have been trampled upon over the last few hundred years, but now the global world needs it. Ultimately, everyone originated in Africa. Everyone will ultimately go back home. Maybe not physically, but certainly spiritually. So I invite you, my fellow Africans, to the message and for us to, once and for all, elevate the thinking game, elevate African paradigms and African worldview to a point where we now become major players on the world scene. The world is tired of projects and programs and products, solutions from the West and now from the East. The world is also looking forward to modern, really super products from Africa. The best in fashion, the best in architecture, the best in music, and above all, the best in human relations, which is where our destiny is going to be, healing the world. Thank you very much.